tonight, one of the many that I'm having, to regain my legs and my limbs and my life, really. I just feel really good today, and I think today is day one of the start of a video diary from me.
Dead or alive. Yeah. She had to go through that.
Hello. Today we're going to do a program that's going to take us into an area that most of us are not directly familiar with. The title of the program is Covering War for the World, Benjamin Hall Correspondent. This is a picture of Benjamin Hall. He's known by his friends and his colleagues as Benji, so probably throughout the program I'm going to refer to him as Benji too. He is a seasoned war correspondent. Of course, this picture shows him as a very happy young man, pretty much happy-go-lucky. He's well on his way toward developing an excellent career in journalism. He has been hired by a major news network. After he tried out for several career options, Benji settled his heart on becoming a war correspondent. What exactly is a war correspondent? I decided I'd dig deeply into this to get us a good working definition so we would understand the difference between a war correspondent and a soldier or a Marine. Here's the definition that Cornell comes up with, which I think is a very good one. War correspondents are specialized journalists who are present in times of war or armed conflict with the authorization of the armed forces. War correspondents work under the protection of the Army on the locations of their operations. Their primary mission is to report on the war and to provide information on events relating to the hostilities. War correspondents are protected under international humanitarian law and are considered as civilians under Article 79 of the Second Additional Protocol to the Geneva Convention. In other words, war correspondents are on the scene. War correspondents are the eyes and ears for the public about what is really happening on the front lines. Benjamin Hall is following in the footsteps of war correspondent legends. I thought we'd begin today's program with a look back through the war correspondent's history. Some of the names you're going to recognize. They'll be familiar to you. But some of the others may be new ones, particularly for some of you who perhaps are a little young. All, though, are legends in their work. First one is Ernest Hemingway. You know I'm a Reformed English teacher, so you knew I was going to put a Nobel laureate up first. But I'm talking today about his work in the wartime. He worked as a volunteer Red Cross ambulance driver during World War II in Italy. He had tried to join the United States Army, but he had very poor eyesight, and that kept him from being accepted. By the time World War II broke out, he was already an acclaimed author. He embedded himself in conflict. He was actually in combat, including the Normandy landings and the liberation of Paris. That's why his later writings are perhaps among his best. Another is Ernie Pyle. I had heard of Ernie Pyle, but I didn't really know much about him. He was a World War II correspondent too. He covered North Africa, Europe, and the Pacific with the American troops. He was killed in his Jeep while he was covering the war in Japan. A Japanese machine gunner targeted his vehicle. Edward R. Murrow is probably a name familiar to most of you. He covered many of the events that led up to the actual beginning of World War II, and he covered them for CBS. He flew on 25 Allied combat missions over Europe. And in person, he covered the Blitz in London. He was known for standing in the broken buildings, even atop the broken buildings of the Blitz to give his report, to give the flavor to the public of what was happening in London. After World War II, he became vice president of CBS and head of CBS News. Margaret Bourke White, you may be familiar with because of the movie Gandhi. She was a photojournalist and the first Western professional photographer permitted to enter the Soviet Union. She was the first woman allowed to work in combat zones during World War II. She covered North Africa, Italy, and Germany. She died of Parkinson's disease. Margaret Higgins is one you may be less familiar with. She covered World War II in Paris, London, and Germany. She was present at the liberation of the Dachau concentration camp. Later, she covered the Korean War and was awarded the 1951 Pulitzer Prize for international reporting. She died early from a disease that she contracted during her time covering the Vietnam War. Wolf Blitzer is probably a little more familiar. He's still active. He's correspondent for CNN. He began his work during the Gulf War. His career started in Tel Aviv, and it was enhanced because he was fluent in Hebrew, and it meant he could talk to the locals and also communicate what was happening. He became ultimately CNN's military affairs reporter. Daniel Pearl is another. He served as the Southeast Asia bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal. After the attacks against America on September 11, 2001, he relocated to Karachi, Pakistan. He was abducted there the following year by a Pakistani military group militant, and he was beheaded 9 days later. Summertime, and the living is easy. This is a picture of Benjamin Hall and his young family. They're relaxing together in the sunshine. His wife, Alicia, is with him, and their 3 daughters, whom they named Hero, Honor, and Iris. And they're enjoying downtime before Benjamin has to return to the front lines. That's a delightful photograph of a happy young family. Take a few moments to really look at it. Notice the joy and happiness that you see there. They're relaxed and carefree. They're anticipating a wonderful future together. Like many of us, the Halls are optimistic. Like many of us, the Halls have no idea what their future is about to bring. Now look at this photograph. Against incredible odds, Benji survived a Russian missile attack that killed 2 of his colleagues. After surviving that direct hit, Ben was delivered safely out of the war zone to the USA, all in the hopes of saving his life. What happened to this family and how each of them managed to come through it is a wonderful story of survival, strength, faith. My problem was how best to tell this story. I decided to use a combination of things. First, Ben's own words, written in his memoir. I looked at media accounts of Hall's heroic rescue, how he was gotten out of a war zone and to a military hospital in Texas. And also I read interviews by Hall and others about the experience. My primary source was, in fact, the memoir. It's entitled Saved, A War Reporter's Mission to Make It Home. Benjamin Hall wrote it under extraordinary circumstances. It was published by HarperCollins on March 24th, 2023. Saved was published exactly 1 year to the day after Hall's horrendous injury. Benji wrote it by taping his thoughts into his phone as soon as he could manage the phone, and then having them transcribed later during the long months of recovery in Texas. There is no index to saved, which can be frustrating for those, again, Reformed English teachers, especially since the book is not written in chronological order. It will not affect you as the general reader because it's a beautifully written book, and the fact that it skips from present to past and some thoughts about the future periodically throughout, it's not going to be a problem for you. Rest assured, his command of the English language is a beautiful command of the language. It was debuted as #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and it had already topped Amazon's bestsellers based on pre-sales ahead of that March 14th, 2023 release. His dedication says everything, the dedication to this book, because he wrote it for his children and for others. This is what it reads. To my wife Alicia and my daughters, Honor, Iris, and Hero, you are the reasons I'm here today, and I love you more than I can hope to convey. And to the casualties of wars everywhere, the people who have given so much and shown such extraordinary courage, all in the fight to make this world a better place. Your losses and sacrifices will never be forgotten. Telling Benji Hall's story is incredibly challenging, even though I had his own words to rely on. You already know that he survived it. You already know, if you watch Fox News Channel, that he's back at work as a war correspondent. I think my point to you is this. Benjamin Hall's story is about much more than this horrendous experience. Much more. Benjamin Hall's story actually begins 2 generations before his own survival chapter occurs. The beginning was marked by the Battle of Manila in 1945 from February 3rd to March 3rd. It produced some of the heaviest urban fighting in World War II. Benjamin Hall's father was alive and in Manila during this time. And so 75 years after that experience, Hall interviewed his father about the battle and what it was like. This is a quote from from that particular interview. It goes, "Things got worse and worse as the battle started," my father said. The whole area was being shelled night and day. There was indiscriminate killing of women and children and men everywhere. Benjamin's father remembered that the family lived under their house, which was actually built on stilts, so they would get under it. And then when the hard shelling began, the family would go to their garden because there was nowhere else to go. The closer the U.S. forces got to Manila, the more unspeakable atrocities the Japanese committed. They did gang raping, they did beheading, they did mass executions, and infanticide. Benjamin's father, Roderick Hall, was a 12-year-old at the time. He and his siblings, Ian, Consuelo, and Alistair, had lived through the Japanese occupation with their parents for a number of years. Another excerpt from the interview that Benjamin did with his father reads this way. One day, Japanese soldiers arrived at the family house. My grandfather had been sent to a Japanese camp a couple of years earlier, along with thousands of Americans and other foreign men and the others there. They had their hands tied. They pleaded with the Japanese, telling them women and children weren't a threat. They were untied, but still taken away and marched through the streets. What happened over the following days is unclear. My father and his siblings were released and for a few days allowed to bring food to the adults, but one day that stopped too. And my father's mother, grandmother, aunt, and uncle were never seen again, all victims of the Japanese slaughter. Their bodies were never found. This photograph is from the United States Army Archives, and I think it gives us at least some idea of how desperate the conditions were for the refugees during this time. I cannot imagine being a 12-year-old and trying to comprehend this kind of disruption. Hall, again in an interview with his father, says this: "A couple of weeks later, as the Americans moved closer, my father and his siblings, now all alone, made a dash for it, trying to leave the Japanese zone and reach the liberating U.S. GIs. Running through the bombed-out streets, trying to reach safety, my father remembers how another little boy was shot dead just ahead of him by a sniper. All of them stopped in their tracks, stunned, but the GIs just ahead of them screamed at them to keep coming. When they reached the American lines, they were met by large canisters of scrambled eggs and hot coffee. They reached safety." This picture is a treasure for the Hall family. It shows Ben's grandfather, who's standing, and then Ben's father, Roderick, and then his three siblings, Ian, Consuelo, and Alastair. The picture was taken by an American GI, and it was taken at the Santa Thomas camp after they were saved. This picture shows Benjamin Hall's uncle, Ian, one of the little boys in that picture, and his father, Roderick, just before they are deployed to Korea as young men. Both of them survived. The father survived. His grandfather survived. Ian and the children survived. The family moved to America, where Roderick graduated from Stanford. Ian's father, Roderick, and his brother enlisted in the U.S. Army to serve in Korea. Benjamin's father said that he had been saved by the U.S. military and that he would be grateful for the rest of his life. This is a charming picture made during that interview session between Ben and his father, as his father remembers that horrible experience 75 years ago. That interview happened in 2020, and it preserved his father's memory at a time when it was important to do so. His father didn't have long to live. It also reinforced for Benjamin the idea of the importance of working for the things that are important and the importance of the military to protect you. In just 2 years, Benjamin would have his own will to live tested in a way he had never imagined. Benji buried his father 20 days before the missile nearly killed him. Pictures of Benji's parents are really difficult to find. Thanks to Saved, I have two. This one shows Benji's father bullfighting. Benji's father was an adventurer. When he died, his obituary read that he, quote, stayed with tribes in Venezuela, fished in the Amazon, climbed volcanoes in Ethiopia. He had gone birding in the Galapagos, and he had ridden a hot air balloon through Burma. And then not long after Korea, he decided to try bullfighting in Spain and Andalusia. This picture is a perfect son and mom picture, I think. Benji's out for a ride in Hampshire, in England, with his mom, Jenny, pedaling away. He, of course, is looking carefully to see where they're going to go. In Saved, Hall says this: we are products of what we inherit. In my case, my father's strict moral code and his reverence for soldiers and nations battling against aggression, and my mother's beautiful curiosity about the world and her restless desire to experience it all. When Ben was about 10, he and his older Barnaby were enrolled at Ampleforth Boarding School. It's located in North Yorkshire. His father thought it would be good for the boys. Later, Ben wrote that he learned very important things at Ampleforth. He learned that he had an inner strength. He learned that he could sing. He was a soloist in the choir. He has a beautiful voice. He learned that he was good at sports. And he learned that religion was bedrock for him. When he was about 15, Ben's mother decided that her sons had had enough boarding school. So she withdrew them and enrolled them in the City of London school. The boys would learn plenty there, but they would actually learn more when traveling with the family. Among their many adventures were these. They lived in mud huts in Venezuela and in tents in Botswana. They floated boats down the Nile. They drove cars all over India. They spent 2 weeks fishing down the Amazon when Ben was just 15, and they could only eat what they caught. That created a problem because all they caught for a long time was piranha. And piranha apparently is a little too bony to eat. So they lived on piranha soup for nearly all of the time they were on the Amazon. And then my favorite escapade, they rode horses through the streets of St. Petersburg, Russia, after a little bit too much to drink. That was to celebrate Ben's 19th birthday. Benji loved life. He looked for adventure just as his mother and dad all did. He wanted all that life could offer him. One of his adventures was to come to America to go to college. He enrolled at Duke University. He has dual citizenship with the UK and the US. At Duke, he was to be part of the class of 2004. But he didn't graduate from Duke. And this is what he has to say. I spent far too much time at parties and meandered around obscure interests like the films of Stanley Kubrick, Russian revolutionary cinema, history, and writing. At 22, I took an internship at Columbia Pictures in Los Angeles, and after sitting around in meeting after meeting about demographic scores, I realized I didn't want to earn my living in Hollywood. He came home, came back to London, and he earned a bachelor's degree at Richmond University. He also earned a postgraduate diploma in television journalism from the University of the Arts. In 2007, he decided that his destiny was to make documentaries in war zones, and he picked as his first destination Iraq. This is what he says about it. I decided that what I really wanted to do was experience and record extreme events in far-flung places, life at its very edges. More specifically, I wanted to know what it was like to live in a place of war. I'd read about some young Iraqi rappers who were embracing U.S. culture and whose concerts were being attacked, and I decided to start with them. I would make a documentary about the rappers. Of course, I had no idea how to make a documentary or even what steps to take first. But just the idea of trying to do it excited me like nothing else had before. He survived his first foray working in a war zone. Gradually, he focused more and more on the Middle East. He started out pretty successfully as a freelance writer for the New York Times, the Times of London, the Sunday Times, and the BBC. In 2015, he published his first book, saved as book number 2. His first book is entitled Inside ISIS, The Brutal Rise of a Terrorist Army. It was published, as I said, in 2015. This book is the result of his very daring journalistic work. He reported from behind enemy lines while embedded with rebel troops and regime troops. He even smuggled himself into Libya at one point, and then smuggled himself into other countries as well, all to get the story. Meet Alicia Miller. She's the Australian who would become Mrs. Benjamin Hall. Alicia's parents founded Senso. It's an Australian fashion and shoe brand, and they founded it in 1979. Alicia and her 2 sisters run the company today. Alicia's third is to take care of international development, get the brand recognized internationally. This is a picture showing that this truly is a family affair. They select styles, they decide what is probably going to be hot in the fashion industry, particularly shoes, and then they move on it. Their desire, the parents' desire originally, and then the girls are carrying it forward, they wanted to provide a high-quality, high-style shoe, but with a youthful vibe that maybe their parents had put in. Here is an ad from Senso, and you see some of their different styles, and they're very interesting. I mean, they go from boot-like pieces to slides to very high heels. In the upper right-hand photo is their slide, and it's one of their very best sellers. In 2014, this picture was taken. It's a selfie. Benjamin is taking it, and it's of Benjamin and Alicia. Because both of them traveled often for work, they didn't have a lot of time for dating. He was off to war zones in the Middle East. She was in Australia for the company, the business, back and forth. Still, they managed, and they became a serious couple. In 2014, they discovered that they were expecting their first child. Ben telephoned his future father-in-law in Australia from his post in Iraq to ask permission to marry her. Permission was granted. They married in July of that year at Brompton Oratory, a Roman Catholic church in London. Ironically, Ben had sung in the choir here frequently. The church is neoclassical in its architectural style. It's very stunning on the outside, and as you can see, equally stunning on the inside. Their marriage was lovely. They were able to have their family present, their friends present. It all was picture perfect, again, for this young family, happy and on their way. Ultimately, they will welcome 3 children, 3 daughters, Honor, Iris, and Hero. And at the same time, Benji's career with Fox News is growing. Benji loved being a father. Alicia loved being a mother, but Benji loved being a father. The couple had decided before they married that they would like to have 3 children, and they did. And they loved growing their family. However, as happens with everyone where both members of both parents are working, balancing work and family was challenging. Each of them had jobs around the globe, so they traveled around the globe to handle that, but they also had a young family to nurture. During COVID, they took off time and just stayed at home. it was a perfect excuse to sort of reconnect the family and really enjoy growing the children. Benji's reputation for excellence was sky high. His desire to go get the story wherever that led was kicked into high gear when Russian President Putin began invading Ukraine. On February 26, 2022, Ben and his cameraman, Pierre, an Irishman who had the same love for working the war zone as Ben did, were making their way to Ukraine. It would be a journey that would mark the end of 2 lives and a second beginning for a third. Ben and Pierre and the rest of the crew hit the ground running. This is a picture of Ben doing a report from Kyiv, Ukraine. It is the last known photograph of Benjamin reporting before the missile strike that would kill 2 of his colleagues and nearly cost him his own life. Pierre is the photographer. He will die in the missile attack. Soon after, with about 2 hours of sleep, the crew was on its way again, this time into Kyiv. I love this picture. This is a picture of Ben in the front seat with Pierre riding in the other front seat and 2 of their colleagues, and they're traveling to Kyiv. Here's our timeline. March 14th, 2022, Ben was traveling outside of Kyiv when the car that he and his crew were traveling in was hit by missile attack. Ben was badly wounded and burned and left about 40 minutes on the roadside with no way to get help. Everyone around him was dead. Pierre was killed, along with Ukrainian journalist Sasha Kashanova. Over the next year, Ben would undergo over 30 surgeries. He would lose his right leg, his left foot, and his left thumb. He would also lose his left eye. This is a picture of him. It's taken about 30 days after the missile hit. He was rescued by a Ukrainian combat leader who had taken a wrong turn along an abandoned road and happened to see Ben waving weakly for help. He scooped up Ben with these horrific injuries, put him in his van, and took him to the closest hospital during wartime. Fox News executives learned that Ben might have been hurt. Led by Jennifer Griffin, who used her contacts, official and unofficial, managed to find out where Ben was and managed to get him moved out of Ukraine into Poland, where the U.S. then could assist him. Thanks to Jennifer Griffin and her contacts, Ben was actually able to be evacuated from a war zone into a country where he would be safe and the U.S. could take care of him. This is a picture of him being loaded onto the Polish Prime Minister's private train that would take him and the Prime Minister back to Poland and away from the Ukrainian war zone. It's a miracle that this happened. Save Our Allies was key to Ben's ultimate survival. This is a group, it's well known in certain circles, but not generally well known. But it's a collection of individuals who devote themselves and their considerable skills into helping extricate people from very difficult situations under difficult circumstances. 2 volunteers from Save Our Allies went in, found Ben, moved him from one hospital to a second hospital, and then got him to and on the Polish Prime Minister's private train. We'll never know who they were. We know them only by the code names that they're given in the book. Those are the only names that Benjamin knew them by. This is the most compelling part of the book because it talks about what this man went through to be able to come back to life. He was flown to the U.S. military hospital in Landstuhl, Germany. He stayed there for a few days, 10, I think. Alicia came to visit him one day from London. She flew in, visited with him. She wanted to hold him. She wanted to see that he was alive and he was Benjamin. And then she flew back to London so that she could be home with the little girls for their dinner time. The two of them, the parents, decided that the most important thing over this next unknown period of time was that as much normalcy be returned to the girls' lives as possible. Alicia would not see Ben again for 5 months. Benjamin said this in an interview with Fox News about that circumstance and this business of now knowing he was going to have to work to bring himself back to living. He said, "I speak to a lot of veterans who have been injured the way that I have been, and they call this their Alive Day. It's the day when you realize you've got another chance at life. You can go and do amazing things. Don't waste a second. Make sure that you make the most of it." 10 days later, Ben was flown to the U.S. Army Hospital in San Antonio, Texas. Ben and Alicia had thought that he would go to Walter Reed. But it turns out that the doctors who were specialists in the variety of injuries that Benjamin had sustained were located in Texas. When he got there, they did a complete physical exam, and they estimated that it would take 2 years of intense physical therapy for Ben to be able to recover. Ben would hear nothing of that. He decided no, he could recover quicker than that, and so he set his mind to it. Here you have 2 pictures of him taken during the time he's in Texas working on his rehab. The first one, he's still pretty sad. He's had the amputations, as you can see, and his thumb that's in very bad shape is still very bloody. He looks bad, and he is in bad shape. The second one, taken just several months later, shows him up on his prosthetics, smiling, walking. On August 21st, 2022, against major odds, Benjamin flew home to London in time to celebrate his eldest daughter's birthday. Alicia met him when he landed. In July, Benjamin had celebrated his 40th birthday in Texas. He had had a physical setback, and so he couldn't go home to London and his family for his 40th, which had been his original plan. 2 of his best guy friends flew to Texas to be with him from London so they could celebrate. They decided to do what all Texans do when they want to celebrate. They took him to a rodeo. None of them had ever been to one, and they thought this is the way to celebrate breaking out. Benjamin wrote later that it was wonderful because it was the first thing that felt truly normal to him. He was allowed 1 beer, and it was the first he had had since the night before the missile strike. He said it was the most delicious beer he'd ever had. The joy at their reunification when Alicia and Benjamin were together again, it's seen on both of their faces. Ben came home with the finest instruments available for recovering from and living with the injuries he had sustained. But you know, he found being back with his girls was the best medicine yet. Look at Benji today. He's back at work at Fox. He's gone back to the front lines again, but this time he has a clearer sense of purpose, not just of his purpose at work, but his purpose with his family and his purpose in life. He returned to Ukraine, And he did that to interview President Zelensky. He returned in November of 2023. He did an interview with Zelensky, which was a very, very good one. I hope some of you got to see it. At that time, Zelensky presented Benji with the Order of Merit for his, quote, outstanding personal contribution to strengthening interstate cooperation, support for Ukraine's independence, and territorial integrity. It was a very moving moment for both men, and one that certainly Benjamin will never forget. Once again, though, Benjamin is doing those little things that he discovered during recovery really are the ones that mean the most in life. One of the things he talks about in Saved is when the pain was at its worst, when he was doing the physical therapy and every move was excruciating, he kept thinking, do it, and then you can get back to reading bedtime stories to your children. And he did. He also, at every opportunity, remembers the deaths of his two colleagues. Benjamin Hall isn't finished as a war correspondent. In many ways, he's only just begun.